Welcome back to Citizen One, exploring our urban future. I'm your host, Douglas Stewart McDaniel. There are some people who fear never having the opportunity to see the world. Still others meticulously count the cities and countries they have visited, fearing that they may see all of it and yet return home exactly as heavy as they left. And there are others, like me, who somewhere along the way found their hope finally outrunning such fear. That in every city or country we have spent time, we will keep new friendships until we die. That the connection does not end when our time together does. That this longing for people, place, and connection is not the cost of the leaving, but the evidence that it mattered. I had come this afternoon to the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne, expecting to see a museum of empire, like the British Museum or the Victoria and Albert back in London, from the other side of the empire. And somewhere in it, many of the old paintings of the 18th and 19th century Grand Tour, dragged home across oceans by wealthy aristocrats as proof they had made it around the world. What I didn't expect was to meet the counter-argument first, on the ground floor dressed up as a yellow pumpkin, and to take 3 hours and 3 floors to understand that's what it was. It was a Sunday afternoon in June, which in Melbourne means the bottom of the world and the bottom of the year. The southern winter coming down off the Bass Strait Grey and sideways, the light gone the color of dishwater by 3 in the afternoon. I took a tram down Elizabeth Street to the Queen Victoria Market because I had a free morning, and the habit, in any city I am made to live in, of going first to the place where the people who actually run it go to buy their meats and veggies. The trams are the green of a billiard table and the cream of old piano keys, and they go everywhere. Not the heritage kind kept around for tourists to photograph. These are working streetcars, a whole grid of them running the lengths of Elizabeth, Victoria, Swanston, and the like, and out into every suburb the city ever bothered to reach. They come constant, they come quiet, and within the downtown zone they cost nothing at all. You step on, you step off, no tap, no fare in the free zone, no questions. The way a city treats movement when it has decided movement is a right and not a transaction. A man raised on American cities, where the bus is considered by the middle class as a punishment the poor are sentenced to, stands on Swanston watching the free trams stack up, unload, and pull away, and thinks, so it can be done. They simply chose to do it. An urbanist's utopia, rolling past in billiard green every 90 seconds, almost rudely provocative with how well it all works. I step off the tram and cross the street into the Old Vic Market, one of the oldest arguments Melbourne has with itself. And it does not advertise the fact. I did not know, walking the sheds, that I was walking on the dead. I learned it the way I learn everything, by reading the gaps and exploring the edges of a city. The 7 hectares of Queen Vic Market sit on top of Melbourne's first cemetery, the original burying ground, closed in 1854 and paved over for commerce when the city decided it wanted the land more than it wanted the memory. They moved 914 bodies out between 1920 and 1922, give or take, what the record admits to, and they did not move all of them. Some of the early settlers are still down there under the fruit sheds and the customer car park, holding their allotments. And Sir John Monash himself, an Australian military commander of the First World War, stood up and said it was a disgrace, a lack of respect for history, and the work went ahead anyway, because the work always goes ahead. Decisions get made. Civic accountability arrives late, if at all. What gets paved over gets called progress, and then it gets called heritage, and then it gets a plaque. I have written that exact sentence about a dozen towns. It is restful, in a grim way, to find it waiting for me again here at the bottom of the world. So I poke around on top of all that, which is what the living do. I browse through the booksellers first, the secondhand men and women with their trestle tables under H shed, the foxed paperbacks and the local histories nobody reads, and the one stall that had a shelf of Australian true crime I stood in front of longer than I'll admit. Then the Meat and Fish Hall, the oldest building on the site, 1869, the famous 1884 facade out front. Inside it was all crushed ice and the smell of the sea and butchers in bloodied aprons, calling out to women, they have sold to for 30 years. The whole hall ringing off the tiles the way a cold room does. Then the dairy produce hall, Art Deco, marble counters built before refrigeration to keep the cheese cool, and now wall to wall with delicatessens and noodle bars. Because after the war, the Italians and the Greeks came and turned a dairy into a parade of cured meat and olives, and 3 generations of the same family behind the same counter. I bought a coffee and a borek from a Turkish woman who did not look up. I bought nothing I needed and took more photos on my phone than I care to admit. I was doing what I do, which is reading a city by the things it sells and the things it has buried. And the Queen Vic does both at once, openly, with the dead under the floorboards and the living haggling over Flathead above them. From Queen Victoria Market, I walked several kilometers down Swanston Street. In a crisp winter breeze, the city laid out straight ahead, laid out the way my English teachers taught me, to diagram a sentence before you decide what it means. A street keeps its own minutes. Swanston runs through Melbourne's memory in strata, and someone who reads buildings the way I read court files and civic records can stand at one corner and see the whole argument the city has had with itself. The Victorian stuff first. The boom time bluestone and the rendered facades, the cast iron lace on the balconies, banking halls built in the 1880s to look like temples, because money, then as now, preferred to be worshipped indoors. Gold rush confidence, frozen, the kind of architecture a town puts up when it has just gotten rich and does not yet suspect it can ever be otherwise. I kept south. The city thickened. The tower of the town hall, the spires of St. Paul's waiting downhill at the river end, the trams stacking up at the intersections and unloading their pale winter crowds. And then Chinatown breached the street itself, the arches standing on both sides of Swanston at Heffernan Lane, red and gold gone slightly weathered, the gates not tucked away on a side street but planted square across the main spine, claiming it. Behind them, the lane mouths breathed out steam and garlic and hot oil into the cold. Melbourne's Chinatown is the oldest continuous one in the country. Men came for the same gold that built the bluestone temples back up Swanston, and stayed, and were not always thanked for it, and built a quarter that outlasted that lack of gratitude. That's the part worth standing still for. Not a quarter pushed off to the margins, but one that holds its ground on the city's own central street, arches over the same trams that run past the town hall. The boulevard and the lanes telling the same story for once, out in the open. I walked it slowly, the cold making the kitchen smells carry, and pointed myself at the water. Swanston Street runs out at the river the way every street finally runs out at something it can't pave. St. Paul's on the left, Gothic and sooted and certain, the ornate exterior and humble 1960s interior of Flinders Street Station on the right, its dome and its clocks the color of butter under the gray, every Melburnian who ever made a plan having made it under those clocks. And then the bridge, Prince's Bridge, the bluestone and the iron carrying Swanston over the Yarra, the river underneath moving brown and patient, and in no hurry to explain itself. I stopped on the bridge the way you stop at the end of a thought. The wind came harder off the water. Rowers, impossibly, were out on it. Thin boats threading the cold current under the willows on the far bank. And the city stood up behind them in all its layers at once. The Victorian and the modern and the glass, the gold rush temples and the deranged campus, and the weathered red gates a block off the main drag. The whole argument the place has been having with itself since 1835, laid out along a single street a person could walk in an afternoon if the wind allowed. I had walked several kilometers and crossed more than 150 years, and the river didn't care, and that felt right. Rivers are the only honest archive. They take everything and keep none of it where you can reach it. Another few massive blocks, and the National Gallery of Victoria reared up out of the gray of the city. The building announces itself a block off, low and long, no dome, no columns, none of the temple business the Victorians back up Swanston used to insist a serious institution required. Roy Grounds built it in 1968 to look like a fortress that had made peace. bluestone laid in great rusticated courses, a flat, unbroken wall running the length of the forecourt, the stone the color of a coming storm and rough enough to read like geology rather than masonry. Modernism in its certain phase, when a building could be a single grand gesture and trust you to find it austere on purpose. Across the front runs the moat, the long, shallow water that has no job but to hold the sky and double the facade, and the fountains working the surface of it even in the cold, the spray catching what little light the afternoon was willing to spend. Water on the outside, water on the way in. Grounds wanted you wet to the eye before you ever reached the art. And out front of all that gray certainty amid the bright fountains, planted on the forecourt where it cannot be avoided, the thumb. A bronze hand the height of a house, fist closed, giving the world a thumbs up. Except the thumb has been pulled like taffy, stretched up and up past any bone that could hold it, a good sign distended into something the eye can't quite forgive. David Shrigley's Really Good, they call it, and the joke is in the title doing the same thing the thumb does. Approval cranked so far past sincerity, it curdles. It greets you the way a city greets a man who has been gone a long time. Too friendly, slightly wrong, the gesture held a beat too long. I stood with it a minute in the wind. It is the most honest thing on the lot, that thumb, because it admits the performance. Everything else on St. Kilda Road manages to keep a straighter face. At the museum entrance, water courses down 2 stories of glass panels as cold as the street. Inside, the building opens up the way he meant it to. Long blue stone halls. The room past the entrance opening into a court the size of a town square. Federation Court, roofed in a grid of steel and glass that throws the flat white winter light straight down onto the stone. The benefactors' names are cut into the blue stone along one wall, the way names always get cut into the wall in rooms like this. Who gave, who is owed, who bought a sliver of permanence in carved letters, while the art on the floor came and went on loan. Dead center on the pale disk where Federation Court opens its grid of clear glass to the white winter sky stood the pumpkin. I took it for a spider at first. The eye reaches for spider when a thing has that many legs. But it was a gourd, yellow as a caution sign and pocked all over with black dots in that swelling graduated scale, 11 splayed legs twisting up off the floor to a single curled head. 95-year-old Yayoi Kusama's Dancing Pumpkin, 2020. Kusama has been painting this same pumpkin in different proportions and scale for more than 80 years, since she was a girl on her family's seed farm in Matsumoto. And the dots since longer than that. The dots are the obliteration she has spent a lifetime holding off, the pattern that wants to scatter the self into the infinite. And the pumpkin is the homely thing she sets against it, the anchor painted and repainted so it cannot float away. People walked in under its legs to look up into the dark of it. I filed it away without knowing yet what it was the answer to. A woman who had stayed mostly in one room her whole life, painting one gourd until it filled the universe. I would not understand what she was arguing against until I had climbed 3 floors and stood in front of the relics of men who did the opposite. For now, it was only a yellow thing on a pale disk, twisting as if it might dance, and I went looking for the stairs. I had 2 hours before a call with people who were still asleep on the other side of the world, and I had come to see a museum of empire. The current exhibitions included bejeweled Cartier masterpieces, art of the indigenous Pacific, European old masters, emerging Australian and First Nation artists, 19th century salons, and international surrealist, impressionist, and modernist masters. And there, in a corner of the 18th century rooms on the 3rd floor, I found what I had expected to find, a little cluster of canvases the gallery had gathered under one heading, the Grand Tour. 17th century into the 19th. The wall text explained it gently, as though it were describing a charming custom rather than a system. Young aristocrats left Britain for their first overseas experience to learn the art and culture of Europe. That is the polite version. The truer version is that a young man of the right family was sent abroad to acquire the finish a country house couldn't supply. A little Latin remembered, a little French acquired. A fever survived in Naples, a canvas carried home to hang in the hall where visitors would see it and understand, without anyone having to say the words, that the boy had seen the world, mostly the boy. But not only, and this is the part the heading on the wall declined to carry, women made the same crossing. Lady Mary Wortley Montague, Lady Hester Stanhope, the ones whose names survived, and behind them at least 955 more that a Stanford classicist has only lately dug back out of the registers. Women who stood in the same Roman light and came home with the same dust on their shoes. The record kept them too, in its way. It filed them under a husband, a father, an uncle they were said to be traveling with. It demoted their testimony from oil on canvas to letters home, the cheaper medium, the one that does not hang. And then, the surest management of all, it mostly lost them. 955 made the tour and came back to no commission. The men got the portrait. The women got the footnote, and then not even that. The painting was never a souvenir. It was a credential. It said I crossed water and came back with gravitas. In their world, as in the one I make my living describing, that was often enough. So I stood in front of them, Canaletto first. The Bacino di San Marco, Venice seen from the water. The Doge's city laid out in light so clean it looks laundered. Every gondola placed where a gondola should be, and not 1 inch out of true. A city I had spent months in only 3 years ago, designing an exhibition for the city of the future in a 9th century monastery. Beside it, Bellotto, the nephew, painting the Grand Canal up toward the Rialto with the same trained patience, the same flattering haze. Then Panini, the Cumaean Sibyl, handing down her oracles in a Rome more composed than Rome ever was. And Tiepolo's Finding of Moses, enormous. The whole biblical theft of a child dressed up in silk, the color of money. They are beautiful. I want to be honest about that, because the argument I am building does not need them to be ugly. They are very beautiful, and they were painted to be carried home as proof. And both of those things are true at once, which is the only register I know how to think in anymore. A name does real work in a gallery. The Grand Tour. It opens a door in the mind and ushers in marble and bergamot and men with soft hands and loud wallets. It does not usher in what the canvases leave out, which is the same thing every record leaves out: the cost, the labor, the rooms where the finish was actually manufactured. I have spent a career learning to read the gap between what a place preserves and what it happened to misplace or intentionally forget, and a gallery, even a royal one like the NGV, is only a courthouse with better lighting. The pictures on the wall are the minutes. The meetings and trials are held elsewhere. I had walked in as a man on a 2-week working holiday. I recognized the machinery on the wall immediately, because it is the same machinery, only the freight has changed. They paid to see these places. I get paid to live in them. They had boundless money and a slow ship, and 6 months to plan a crossing I would do between a Tuesday and a Wednesday. With a carry-on and a Wi-Fi password, they counted countries the way I count them, the way travelers have always counted them, men and women both. Paris, Venice, Athens, Rome, Florence. And standing there in the dishwater light, I came to suspect the counting was never really about the places at all. Because here is the inventory the canvases don't hang. Buenos Aires, where I learned the bus before I learned the language, the 152 down Avenida Santa Fe, the city smelling of grilled beef and bus diesel and jacaranda, the porteños arguing about everything at a volume that took me a month to understand, was affection. 6 weeks in Tangier, where the Medina folds in on itself like a thing built to lose a man on purpose, and the call to prayer comes up over the white roofs before the coffee does 5 times. Whether you are ready or not. Cairo, the car horns like a second weather. The dust that gets into the laptop and the lungs and the teeth. The Nile going by brown and enormous and indifferent under a sky the color of a struck match. And a driver there named Hani who would not cheat me, and after a while would not let anyone else. Venice, the real one, not the laundered one on Canaletto's wall, where the tide comes up through the stone drains into the squares and the city is quietly drowning under the weight of everyone arriving to photograph it before it goes. Aqaba, the Red Sea so warm it felt like something was wrong. The Gulf opening south toward nothing. Petra, an hour inland. The Rose Rock keeping 2,000 years of other men's discretion in its grain, Luxor, where the dead outnumber the living and have better real estate, Dubai and Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, conjured whole out of nothing but ambition and other men's backs. The air conditioning roaring against a heat that wants you dead. The skyline going up so fast you could watch it. And then the cities I did on a clock and billed to a client. The cathedrals done in a lunch hour, so many of them now that I cannot honestly tell some of them apart, which is its own kind of confession. And 4 years, no joke, 4 years, in a construction camp in the Saudi desert, which is the room where the finish gets made and never, ever the room that gets painted. That is the one the grand tourist never sat for. There is no gilded canvas of a labor camp at the edge of the empty quarter. No noble ruin, no flattering haze, no canaletto to place each man exactly where a man should be. I can give you the picture because few others have. The heat that has actual weight, that leans on you when you step out of the trailer at dawn and does not let up. The sand that is not the romantic sand of the paintings, but a fine red grit that finds the inside of everything, the keyboard, the bedroll, the back of the throat, the repetition, the same shift, the same mess hall, the same long-distance silence of men and women a very long way from anyone who knew them young, calling home into a phone at hours that made no sense on either end. The light at sundown going the color of the Tiepolo, briefly for free, over a place that would never hang in any hall. The Hijaz Desert was one of the most beautiful places I have ever lived and the most honest, and I have come to think it was the truest stop on the whole itinerary because it was the only one that wasn't selling me anything. The Grand Tour shows you the cathedrals and the canals. The camps show you the quarry the cathedral came out of. One of those is the truth and the other is the painting, and you should know at all times which one you are looking at. Dubai's skyline, the British and the Australian museums, and the Saudi camps are the same sentence read from two ends. The marble in the hall and the meeting held somewhere else. I have stood at both ends of that sentence. Most men who buy the painting never see the quarry, and most men who work the quarry never get within a mile of the great halls, and the rare freight of my particular wild life is that the work has walked me through both over and over until I can no longer see the one without the other. The grand Victorian travelers who commissioned those paintings and I kept the same tally. That is the only thing we share, and it is the uncomfortable part. They were the empire. I was the help that empire moved around. A working hump for the late-stage capitalism of three of them, American and British and Gulf nations, sent where the contract sent me, billing my crossings to a client, the way their footmen once billed their passage to a household. No one was ever going to paint me, I counted anyway. That is the thing to sit with, that I learned to keep the scoreboard of a class I was hired to serve. They suspected the number meant something about them, and so, if I am honest, on a porch, at the bottom of a bottle, do I? The difference is only this. Grand tourists passed through their places, and I inhabited mine. 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 years. Long enough to get a regular coffee and a barista who knew the order. Long enough to learn which Vaporetto runs late, which Cairo driver would not cheat me, which corner of the camp got a signal bar after dark, when missiles were flying overhead. Long enough to get bored, which the tourist never earns. Long enough to get lonely. Long enough to belong more than a little, and then leave lifelong friends behind anyway, which is its own particular theft. Tourists collect views. I accrued routines and then abandoned every one of them. They have Venice in a frame on a wall in Melbourne, behaving itself forever. I have a tide line on a stone wall and the muscle memory of a bus route in a city I will probably not see again. And now I knew what the pumpkin downstairs had been arguing against. The grand tourists count the world to prove they had mattered. The old woman in the one room repeated a single gourd until it filled the universe, not to prove she had gone anywhere, but to keep from disappearing where she stood. One art counts, the other holds on. I had climbed the stairs with the Lord's instinct in my chest and come back down owing the old woman an apology. What does the number of cities or countries protect against? Is it to make one feel large or to feel small? That is the question the gallery left me holding in the 5 o'clock Australian twilight, with the trams going by outside and the call to my daughter 15 hours off. Why do we count? The tourists looking for commission proof, me with my stamps and my date lines and whatever this is. I think the count is a hedge against the suspicion that none of it stuck, or that none of it matters. That a man can cross every water there is and come back exactly as heavy as he left, with nothing in the hold but stamps. To another generation, the paintings were insurance against that suspicion. So is the passport. So is this. We are all the lords and ladies and the nomads and the men in the camps trying to prove to someone, a father, a town, a dead woman whose laughter we still miss, that the travel means something, that we did not merely move. If they hung my portrait in that room, and they will not, the NGV has standards and a heritage listing, the placard would be brief. A man at a hotel desk in a Kaaba, the Red Sea flat and wrong warm out the window, the laptop open and glowing, Petra going pink in the far distance behind his head, not touring, working. The caption would not say gentleman on his tour. It would say what every honest caption in that building should have said and did not, under the canaletto and the bellotto and the silk-wrapped theft of Moses. He went to see the world, and what he brought back was the bill. I left the pictures and walked back down through the blue stone and the colored light, past the people lying flat on the floor of Federation Court, looking up into the glass grid as if the white winter sky were the thing worth coming for, and I put my hand on the water wall again on the way out, cold going to colder, and crossed St. Kilda Road into the Melbourne winter dark because it was already tomorrow somewhere that needed me. And the day I had just spent was about to be billed against a clock in a country I had never set foot in. The lightning bugs, if Melbourne had any in June, had long since clocked out. The split heat system ticked, warming my cold apartment, and I thought about how every city tells a story about itself. Melbourne tells a luxe one. It was itself a gold rush era Dubai with its gold light and grand tours, young lords improved by Europe, beauty carried home and hung where the light is good. The truer story is the one that cities quietly decide not to manage. The quarry under the cathedral, the exploited workers, the meetings held off the minutes, the camps at the edge of the world where the finish gets made by men and women whose portraits no one will ever commission. They would choose to remember the voyage gently and romantically. I choose the opposite. Let the aristocrats and influencers remember it as gentler than it was, because their proof hung on a wall and needed no one. Mine is made of people. A barista in Lisbon who learned my order and my bad Portuguese. Hanny in Cairo who would not cheat me and after a while would not let anyone else and let me help polish his CV via WhatsApp so that he could get into the engineering school he dreamed of. We remain in touch. The men and women in the camp who knew me when no one who knew the younger me was within 7,000 miles. I left every one of them. That is the theft, and I committed it over and over. But here is what I did not expect to bring home, what no customs form has a line for and no canvas can hold. The longing stays. The saudade is not the bill, it is the proof. It is the one credential that cannot be commissioned, hung, or paved over. The evidence carried in the body and not the hold. That the going meant something, that I did not merely move. The aristocrats then and now come home with a painting. I came home full of people I will miss until I die. I will take the ache.